Well, hello! Today it's an Eachine quad and it fits in this little box. But just before we get into it, a quick reminder to please like or dislike if you didn't like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and don't forget to click the little bell which will tell you when I'm uploading stuff, because all of these things really help out the channel. So what have we got here? Those of you keen enough to look at the title page would probably notice it is an Eachine Trashcan 75. It's another in the long and ever-growing list now of 2S capable whoops. And do we need another one? Well, why not? Because it's absolutely horrible weather outside still for me. I haven't been flying in a couple of weeks now, going a bit jittery. So I'm all for something I can fly inside. First thing we notice about this one is it comes in a little case. Isn't that nice? I always do like these just for travelling around. Although these are pretty resilient, you can chuck them in a bag. It's always easier to have them self-contained. Anyway, so let's do an unboxing, an unbagging. This stuff. What we have here is instructions about the binding and the setup on the radio, bag of accessories, a screwdriver, spare set of props, a prop removal tool, a little cable that will make it 1S capable, an Allen key, a couple of little pieces of, I thought it was little silicone pads, they're like felt. I think they're for putting around the battery holder to make it a bit tighter. And some spare tiny screws which made me really regret just emptying it out. Elsewhere we have a little USB charger. Not particularly efficient for all the batteries you have to do. We have these two 1S 300 milliamp hours. These are high voltage, so 3.8 volts. And if we take the actual thing out itself, it's got another two already installed, so you've got two sets. And these are a little bit easy to move, so maybe that's where that felt stuff comes in. I'll just take these out for now. And there you have it. The trash can. And any notion that this was some sort of translation error or something is dispelled by the fact there's actually a picture of a trash can on the back here. So they knew what it was, but they did it anyway. Perhaps they were watching Andy RC's video and watching Florani's dog poo bin and thought trash cans are cool now. I have to say the first thing I noticed about this is it's remarkably similar to my other very favourite current 2S flavour of whoop, which is the Modular 7. It looked almost identical. It's got the same, well, it's pretty much got the same body shell, almost the same frame. It's got a movable camera mount, so you can go up and down, which is really handy if you want to change between indoors and outdoors. It's got the additional LED here, which is quite an interesting feature, and it's got slightly different motors. So where the Modular had 0802 16,000 kV, the Trashcan has 0803 15,000 kV, so slightly different there. But the rest is very similar. You've got you'd plug the two batteries working in series, and hence if you want to fly it with 1S, this is where you just plug one of those and plug one battery in. I also do note that this was in the spares as well. They've put an XT30 connector in, so if you wanted to put a larger simple 2S battery in there, then you could just obviously change out the wires and do that. So the spec in this is pretty similar but pretty nice. F4 controller, 5 amp ESC board. It has this is the Freesco version, it has the receiver built on the flight controller, so it's the SPI version of that, so you don't have to do some complicated hold down a button while you plug it in to bind it, which is quite nice. It says it's got a Cadex EOS 2 camera with a 16:9 image, which is different, and says you can switch the power of the VTX between 25 and 200 milliwatts. This supported smart audio, and I mistakenly thought it could switch power, but it couldn't, so it'd be interesting to see how this does. And of course we can set it up to fly indoors and outdoors. Supports smart audio as well, so you can change your channels around. I'm going to hold up this one because it's quite similar. I guess that the frame is actually a little bit more substantial feeling on that one. On this they've got the struts that hold the ducts a bit further out. On the Modular it was a bit further down, and as such it's a little bit more wobbly. This hasn't quite got as much give in it. It's not, you could snap it in half quite easily if you wanted to. Don't get me wrong there, it's not super strong or anything, but it's just slightly different. Yeah, you can see the size of the lens on the camera as well. This is quite a bit bigger. Oh well, this is going to be interesting. Obviously let's do an indoor flight first, but let's go into beta flight, see what we need to do, see how we can bind it up and stuff, and get some batteries charged up ready to fly. Join me in a second. Okay, so let's put it into beta flight and see what's going on. And you'll see it's running beta flight 4.0.0, so first thing on beta flight 4 I've had. And setup wise, there's hardly anything to do. We've already got TBS Smart Audio set up on Yacht 1. You'd notice there's no serial RX because it uses an SPI receiver. In the configuration section, and one thing I forgot to mention, we've got props going outwards instead of inwards. D-Shot 600 and motor stop is active, which I like. It's called Trashcan here, I'll be changing that one. And down here you see we've got SPR RX support, which is the receiver. This is set to FreeSky X, which is the same as being a D16. If you set it to FreeSky D, that's the same as being a D8, although I don't know particularly why you'd want to. And all the sort of normal stuff is set down here. Power and battery, minimum cell voltage set to 2.9, which is quite useful for these little quads. Pit tuning wise, they've done some work here. We've got a slightly weird RC rate and super rate, giving some weird stuff on it. My normal is to fly with 0.8 all the way down to give 1000 degrees. I'll probably leave this as profile 1 just to see how it feels, but in my other profiles do something different. Receiver tab, this is set to TAER. I need to redo this as EATR. And also bind, which I haven't done yet. I'll come on to that in a second. Modes wide out of the box, arm, angle, and air mode and turtle mode set up. And the OSD looks, pretty good actually. Quite a reasonable setup there. I'm going to make a few little changes, and the LE strip is just the little sort of red Knight Rider style thing going along. Now the reason I'm in here at all is I thought I'd show you an alternative way of doing a bind, which is if you come in here and you type bind, that'll put it in binding mode. I've already got my radio on, so I'm going to go ahead and put this in bind as well, and we should be getting some sort of indication that's happening. I've no idea if you're supposed to say save after this, but let's see if that has bound. Well, the radio seems to think it's got telemetry back, which is a good sign. Go into receiver. Yes, and you can tell our channel map's wrong, can't you? Let's just sort that out quickly. And you can see we've got an RSS channel on aux5 there. I don't know why they don't set this up. I guess it depends how you bind it. So we can have RSSI in our feed. I'll set the rest of this up and then we'll take it off for a proper fly. So here I am indoors for the first flight. Now what I did on this one, I set the throttle limit to 60%, which I based on a bit of a guesstimate about a quad like the Modular working well on 50%, having slightly higher KV. I thought 60% is the way to go here. Now if you don't know what I'm talking about with the throttle limit, I'll put a link to the video that I mentioned this, and basically how to fly on 2S but limit the power. You could of course use that little connector for the battery to make it a 1S quad, but I think using both batteries as 2S but with a reduced max power gives you more flight time, so that's what I went with. However, what I would say, and this is kind of backed up by looking at the throttle percentage I've got there, and thanks so much to all the people that said put your throttle percentage on there, we want to know what you're doing. It really helps when you're looking at stuff and thinking, actually I'm spending most of the time under 50% throttle. I'm not getting to use really the resolution of the stick, therefore I should drop it down. So what I decided from this was this 60% is probably a little bit high and I should change that down, which I did on the next flight. But I still had a good fly around the house. Just I found it a little bit erratic on the throttle. Nice and quick though, and still very controllable. But those fine details were a little bit harder. So coming through the sort of chairs here, it's just a little bit, getting that fine control of the throttle was a little bit lacking for me. But I thought I'd give it the opportunity to check out if turtle mode worked okay, which it did quite nicely. And just flying in Horizon now, I wanted to see how any sort of indoor acrobatics would go. I tend to shy away from
full manual in a very compressed space like this, as I just don't have the room to correct. But yeah, there's plenty of power there to do flips and rolls. Well, plenty of power to spare actually, which is why I decided to change it. So on to the second flight now, and this is with the throttle percentage set to 50%. I also put a little bit of throttle expo in there on Betaflight at 20, which just smooths out that throttle movement I've got and made things feel a lot more controllable just around that mid stick, which was just kind of the hover point. And we're getting through sort of the fine control stuff a lot easier. Now, I also noticed when I was on Betaflight that the D-Shot beeper wasn't set up, and I realised that I kept forgetting that there's been a new command called beacon since version 3.4, which I can never remember. So I wrote a quick blog piece on it, which I'll put a link to here if you keep forgetting how to do this. The sound the beeper makes is not brilliantly loud. It's not like a proper beeper, but it's not too bad if you set it to the max volume. So at 50%, I'm pretty happy. We can fly all around our house. We're pretty controllable. And, well, you know, I flew this around plenty of times and bumped it into a load of stuff, and it holds up no problem. It's so light that there's really no kinetic energy there for it to damage anything. It just sort of bounces off stuff and falls to the floor. I did go ahead and put one of those felt things in to make the batteries a little bit tighter. They can still move fairly easy, so I might put a second one in if I feel that's a problem, but it's kind of like they won't just fall out on their own. So 50%, still plenty to give yourself some indoor acro if you're into that sort of stuff. No problems doing flips and rolls and having time to recover. Quite liking the camera inside the house. I mean, I've turned the lights on to give myself as much light as possible, but it doesn't seem particularly grainy even with the sort of fake light. Now, there is a 20-mile-an-hour wind blowing today, which is kind of crazy, but I decided to just give it a few laps around the garden just to see what the difference would be. And you can kind of see we've got a fairly instant jello where the wind is really buffeting into it. I kind of like it for this in and out the garden sort of thing, but it really is a stupid day to do this sort of thing, and I still managed to bump into things. It is useful having those ducted fans though. I mean, they act like wind sails when you're outside, but good for inside. And we're getting about 4 minutes per battery inside just messing around. So despite that 20-mile-an-hour plus wind gusting around, I decided to take it outside. Now, I wanted to go to the same place that I flew the Mobulo, which is around some trees, and you could get quite tight and quite close to things, and it gives you an impression of speed. This was closed off thanks to the Forestry Commission doing work, and I didn't want to run into a bunch of guys with a JCB and lots of chainsaws, so I tried to find another set of trees. Trouble is, it will look fairly clear from when you look at the outside, and then you're just hitting thousands and thousands of ghost branches or scraggle, or, you know, call it what you like. So I didn't have a particularly good time here. I crashed a lot, and the sort of stuff on the floor is not just plants, it's like brambly stuff, and I'm tripping over and I'm scratching myself trying to get the quad back. But the good news was, it's like this quad takes a hit quite happily. It just bounces off stuff, and it's at least a decent colour where you will see it against green. That beeper though, you've really got to be, because it's just a D-Shot beeper, you've really got to work hard to hear it and be facing the right direction. But I tried to make the best of it. I flew around as much as I can and tried to find some lines that weren't going to hit things, but I crashed and I crashed and I crashed some more. And you will notice there is quite a lot of jello going on with the camera, and this is pretty much down to, if it hits any sort of wind, it will buff it like this, and it will destroy the footage. If you want to know what it looks like where there's no wind, then go back and have a look to the inside footage, and you'll see that's fairly good. I do quite like this camera. It seems to get a good bright image, but contrast wise against these tiny branches, you still can't see anything, and that's not particularly this quad, that's all quads working on FPV feed. So yeah, I did a battery in these woods, and then I'd had enough. I hadn't finished outdoors though. Glutton for punishment, I still stood out in this horrible strong wind and flew it anyway. And, you know, this isn't really the best thing for it. Where we got a more open area, it's always going to feel a little bit pedestrian, which is a bit of a shame, but I had to work with what I had here. And you can see once again that the camera or the quad doesn't hold up well against the wind. It really does have a bit of a wobble on when it goes this way. But it's still got some versatility. All these little 2S whoops, you can fly them outside. I would always say though, if you've got a large open space, this is not the sort of quad you want to fly there. You want tight proximity stuff for this little sort of quad. That's when it becomes more fun. Darting in and out of the trees is good. Now, went a little bit of distance here because I wanted to see how the VTX and the receiver would hold up. You'll notice it's on f1.2 now, so I'm back on the f1 channel at 200 milliwatts, and I'm getting a great picture. And the little receiver, which is the SPI based thing, seems to hold up pretty well. I'm not sure how accurate the RSSI is. It bounces around a lot. But, you know, we seem to be getting a reasonable distance on a little quad. It's not something you'd want to fly far away because, man, trying to find it when it goes down is a right pain. But yeah, it copes okay. And you can see outdoors, we're back on my profile where I've got 100% throttle now. So you can blast it around and do a little acro. And obviously we're back in manual or acro mode here because we've got more space to mess around with. So there's a few things I noted about this quad, and it's pretty much the same with most of these little whoops. It's when you come out of a dive and you put the throttle back on, it seems to yaw out. This is not uncommon. Now I can't say if this is worse or better than any of the other 2S whoops because I'd have to fly them under the same sort of circumstances in the same conditions. But it's something to be aware of, and it's basically I found it mostly in a dive. But you know, whenever you're throttling off and you throttle back on hard, that's when you're going to hit this weird sort of squirrely thing, which can really make things odd. I think distance-wise here, this is just about the furthest I went, and I can get all the way through the woods to the other path, which is some distance away. I mean, it's not massive, but on a little quad like this, flying through the trees, I think the signal and the video signal is actually holding up pretty well. I still can't see enough contrast on these trees though to really see these little branches that might jump out of me at any moment. And you will notice it's somewhat pedestrian coming back. The wind is wanting to blow in front of me here. And yeah, you could really feel it. This little quad, when it goes into the wind, those ducks really do catch the wind. And aside from wobbling it around and causing jello, it really does slow you down. You really do notice it. And looking at my throttle percentages here, I could really see the difference. Once again, I crashed this quad a lot, and I'm happy to say it held up perfectly. No issues. It just me hurting myself going into all the horrible bits of bramble and thorn and getting in the undergrowth to actually retrieve it. I had a good time flying it, although I would say this is completely the wrong conditions and pretty much the wrong location for it. Don't go out in 20-mile-an-hour winds, that's stupid, and have a better place to fly where you've got something nice and tight, like a playground going around there, or nicely spaced out trees where you know there's no ghost branches would be the sort of the fun places to do this. Or of course inside, round a house, in a sports hall. Again, nice tight spaces where you get that real impression of speed, because it's not a properly fast quad, but it will feel fast given the right circumstances, and that's where the real fun comes in.
Well, despite me flying it in conditions that I would suggest you didn't, i.e. very windy outside, it held up really well. It's a really good little 2S whoop. I suppose the big question is, would you buy this or would you buy the Modular 7? And there's not an easy answer to that. They're really too close to call. I kind of thought that the Modular 7 flew better, just as a sort of vague memory. But when I look back at the footage for this, I've got to say that this camera with its extra large lens seemed to get a much better picture indoors. Maybe that bigger aperture is capturing more light. But it also seems a little bit unfair that I didn't fly them both on exactly the same day in exactly the same conditions to work out what's what. Perhaps that's a future video. Perhaps I should fly these together under the same circumstances, inside and outside, and see which holds up better. But the comparison doesn't stop there, because you could say, well, this flies pretty good and it's got a better camera, but what the Modular 7 comes with, as in its standard package, not the basic package, is this 6-way charger, which is really handy, and you can charge all your batteries at once instead of that little USB charger you get in the Trashcan. The Trashcan, you get this lovely little case, though the Modular 7 you can carry it around in here. You can also put higher output VTX than this one. I have to say, too close to call. I say if you got either of these, you are laughing, because they are both really nice little quads and you can fly them, and they're about the same price as well, just to make things more confusing. My memory sort of says this flies slightly better, but there's really not enough in it, so either one of these is really good. But this has been the review of the Eachine Trashcan. Awful name, really nice little quad. Supplied by Banggood, thanks for them, and of course you can find links down below to where you can check it out. I hope this review has been helpful, and until next time, bye for now.
Well, you've made it to the end of the video, so thanks once again for watching. If you like what you saw, then please consider subscribing, and if you really like what you saw, then be sure to check out the link to my blog for a variety of ways in which you can help support this channel.